You are about to have subpoena power. You're about to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Is that something that you're prepared to do?
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. And
that sounds like a yes.
That pretty much is a yes from my point of view,
okay.
That we ought to make sure this report is public.
That was Congressman Adam Schiff getting the Jake Tapper treatment, the California Democrat. He's in line to chair the House Intelligence Committee once the new Congress is seated, something that happens tomorrow. And Schiff says the Democrats, they're going to do everything in their power to make the Mueller report available to the public if President Trump tries to bury it. Now, Schiff isn't the only one talking about subpoenas. A former Solicitor General under President Clinton had this to say.
If the special counsel wants to know what Donald Trump's state of mind is, if he's considering perhaps even just naming him as an unindicted co-conspirator, he needs to interview the president. And I think he could easily take an expedited case on a grand jury subpoena of the president for his testimony up to the Supreme Court.
That is looking forward a couple of steps. And with the new year starting, we thought today would be a good time to take a look at where the Mueller probe stands as 2019 begins. The probe has been going on for more than 18 months, and so far 33 people have been charged with crimes. Now that includes a dozen Russian intelligence officers, and good luck seeing them inside a U.S. court. But it also includes 5 people in Trump's orbit who have pleaded guilty. That group includes Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, and Michael Flynn. And earlier today, I spoke with former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. Roland, first of all, Happy New Year. And unfortunately, the Mueller report did not drop at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, as some people were hoping, I think.
You know, what are you going to do, Andrew? We'll have to talk about something.
It is a new year. It's time for a fresh look at the Mueller probe and all things related to Russia. And seeing whispers that Mueller may issue his report soon, perhaps as soon as the Democrats take over the House or as early as February, and that report could be damning. What's your sense of where we are right now?
I, like most of the commentators, feel like we're in the top of the 8th inning or the bottom of the 8th inning. We're near the end. It's really just a feel based on what I see. So I wouldn't be surprised if, as the commentators have said, they expect a report to come out shortly after the new Congress convenes, perhaps in February. With that said, Mr. Mueller and his team have been so good at hiding so much of what they're up to. It's hard to predict for sure. Maybe it'll come in June. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see.
Plus the top of the 8th, bottom of the 8th inning. It could still take 5 hours to get to the end of the game, especially if it's a Mets game.
Exactly. And there may be extra innings here.
There may be. But for what we know already, Manafort, Flynn, and Cohen being the biggest names, other than Cohen's payoffs to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, nothing implicating the president or the people closest to him, I'm thinking Donnie Jr., Jared, and Ivanka, has come out. If they were the targets, wouldn't we know it by now, Roland?
Yes and no. I think we do know that Don Jr. has got some real problems. I think we know that Jared has got some real problems. Both of them were very involved with the Russians. Don Jr., of course, involved in the infamous June meeting with the Russians. Jared Kushner involved in establishing a back channel to the Russians during the campaign. So, they are in it up to their eyeballs, and it does appear that as we come to what we think is the end of the Mueller investigation, what they're focused on is the connection to Russia. And of course, that would be where Jared and Donald Jr. have the greatest danger. So stay tuned. They may be in the hopper. We'll have to see.
And the reason I brought up Don Jr. and Jared is because other than a charge aimed at the president himself, that would be a real pressure point for this president. And we know that other elected officials facing criminal exposure have traded their office for leniency. I know I'm jumping the gun here, but Michael Grimm, for example, traded his office in Congress for a lighter sentence when he was convicted. It's the cart before the horse here, but from what you know of Mueller, would he be amenable to that if there were smoking guns pointed at Jr. or Jared? Would he consider going easier on Trump if he resigned?
I don't think Mueller would make a deal like that. That's really a deal for Congress to make with the president, where he escapes impeachment and is permitted an opportunity to pardon everybody in sight if he resigns promptly. It's ultimately Congress that holds the whip hand with the president, so any deal like that would have to be made with Congress. And, you know, it wouldn't matter if Mueller indicted Donald Jr. and Jared if Mr. Trump was still president at that point and had the power of pardon. He could still pardon them. So I think that the counterparty to the deal for Mr. Trump is really Congress and not Mr. Mueller.
Well, you touched on this, and I wanted to get into it in greater detail, but the president, can he be indicted? I know there's a Department of Justice memo or there's a policy that's in place, but there's nothing codified in the law, is there?
That's exactly correct. The law is completely open on this topic, and you know, there are a number of scholars, Neil Katyal, for example, who have observed that it would be a very strange thing for a president who obtained his office by illegal activity to be immune from prosecution for the very activity by which he obtained his office. And this case, unlike the case of Richard Nixon or the case of Bill Clinton, is one where there's a real allegation that if there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, it did have a serious impact on the election. And if that collusion was conspiracy and was criminal, and if Mr. Trump was in on the conspiracy, it's very hard to see how the Department of Justice policy would prevent an indictment of Mr. Trump, even if he's still a sitting president at that time.
But that's,
we'll have to see.
That's just what the DOJ guidelines could lead to. And we just saw an example of this on the Supreme Court. There were all these complaints about Brett Kavanaugh and his behavior that came up during his confirmation process. That was investigated and kicked from the Supreme Court to a federal court or federal judge out west who said, well, I can't do anything about this now because he's on the Supreme Court. I mean, it does seem like that would be...
That's different, though.
Yeah?
That's a very different situation, because in that case, you actually have a statute that exempts Supreme Court justices from judicial discipline, so that once the man becomes confirmed as a Supreme Court justice, the statute specifically exempts him from prosecution for judicial misconduct. We don't have such a statute here for President Trump. There's these Department of Justice memoranda which were written for very specific circumstances, not at all applicable here, and there's really no explicit statute that prevents the president from being indicted or prosecuted. Very different scenario here with the president. So while the Kavanaugh thing is troubling, I don't think it's precedent for what might happen with respect to President Trump.
Fair enough. We've heard from some of the Democrats who are coming into power in the House that they're going to subpoena Mueller and the report if the Trump administration tries to keep it secret. Does that work, and what legally can the White House and the Justice Department keep hidden from the public?
I think there's very little they can keep hidden from the public other than classified information. I am sure that Mr. Mueller's investigation has uncovered a great and relates to a great deal of classified material. That material will probably never be available to the public, at least not in the near term. The rest of it, I don't see how in the world they can really keep it out of the public eye, because Congress can subpoena Mueller. They can subpoena the materials at the Department of Justice as part of their oversight role, and they'll certainly do it. If it turns into a situation where the Trump administration, through the Attorney General, is effectively trying to hide the ball from the public, Congress will serve that subpoena, and there'll be an even worse political price to pay for the Trump administration. So I don't even think they'll try to suppress the Mueller report.
Roland Riopelle is a former federal prosecutor and our expert on all things Mueller and Russia related. You don't mind being on standby for the next, 8, 12 weeks, do you, Roland?
No, indeed, I expect it.
Looking forward to it. Roland, thanks very much, as always.
A pleasure, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
Up next, climate change. A lot of people hear about climate change and they think this is abstraction. It doesn't impact me. We're going to show you how it does and how things could get a lot worse if nothing is done.